Boom! Welcome to the Pause Rewind Play podcast. My name is Casey. We got Josh over here.
What's up?
We got Vince over here.
Hello, hello.
And we're here to talk about a horror film this week.
I noticed the other day that you pointed at the camera that's normally in the center
Yeah.
when I was editing the
I
other
keep
night.
doing
And
it, too.
I was like, you pointed at nothing because we have these two cameras.
I
over
should
here.
go to this one for I'm like, welcome. I did it again just barely. I was like, welcome. It's also like, she got that mirror in the front, in the
just
middle.
pointing at yourself?
Pointing at myself like, hey, boy. Like,
That's how you do through the
It's
whole
the
thing.
mirror,
Just like,
man.
I actually do
Your
look at
vanity
myself a
hitting you?
lot, so... I like the look on my face. I'm very handsome to myself and to my wife, and I think that's a good karma. You know, you're like, I'm a good-looking guy.
Yeah.
I could be ugly. I don't even know.
It's the
Actually.
beard and glasses, man.
It is. It makes me look like a professor because half the time I wear cardigans. Like somebody is like kind of professor. I've been deep into research for years, and I like emerge and I have like got the neck beard going on. I'm like, and then I'm like, but I can tell you about random.
I do like the
things."
frames a lot. Like not even kidding. Those frames are sweet.
We're going to the Meat Palace tonight because you get a monthly coupon for what?
Yeah. Birthday. It's a birthday month.
It was your
So-
birthday recently. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. One of me and my good friends since kids, Tim, he's been on the podcast. His wife has the same birthday month as me, September. So for the past, I don't remember how many years, we've been going to Tucanos every year because we get to buy one, get one free. So you guys are invited for this one. Welcome to the tradition. We're gonna
So
eat
excited.
So we got a time limit, a time crunch because we got reservations tonight.
Okay, well we're gonna go celebrate Vince's B-Day. Have a good time at the Meat Factory. Get
Yeah.
the meat sweats. If you're local to Utah, you'll know the restaurant. It starts with a T and ends with Ucanos. But if you're not from Utah, look up your local Brazilian restaurant where they bring sizzling meat out on a platter. It's
On a
delicious.
stick. It's on a
Rodizio.
sword.
Yeah, sword. Yeah, that's it. I was like, it's not a platter, but they have the little bottom piece. It's always
Yeah.
weird how they do it. And I usually tell them just keep dropping food on my plate, and then I waste some. I'm
Never
sorry.
say no. Never say no.
But I don't know. Anyhow, speaking of meat, speaking of things coming out in a very strange way, today's movie we're actually starting and talking about is the Saw franchise, specifically the first Saw movie. I think that last time we were here podcasting, did we talk about it on the podcast or off the podcast? I can't remember, but Josh had said, I've never watched Saw.
Yeah, it was the end of the last one.
Yeah, he said,
Which is another one of those moments, us having this big age difference. Where I'm just like, what?
so,
How?
But like that's what's crazy is like that's something that like I don't know, Vince, like we grew up in kind of like the same area. Like we had like parties for some of these like sketchy movies or like, you know, weird movies where it's like everyone's getting together to watch a scary movie at so and so's house. And like you and I, this was a new release.
Although I didn't see this one until years after as well, because
Really?
I used to hate scary movies.
Okay.
They used to scare me to death, and so I avoided them until I was probably. Let's see. I watched a bunch when I was a kid. It scarred me for years, and then I jumped. I think I went like 6 years, like from like probably longer than that. I think the first horror movie that I saw in my teenage years, I was like 18, and then I didn't watch another one until I was like 22.
was it Darkness Falls about the Tooth Fairy?
No, I think the first one that I returned to watch was it was a video game horror one with like Malcolm from Malcolm in the Middle, whatever his name is. I think it's
Frankie.
Frankie Muniz.
Frankie Muniz,
Yeah.
and if you die in the video game, you die in real life.
Yeah.
I remember watching that one and being like, these aren't scary. I think I was in my 20s. I was like, I can start watching horror movies again because it's like when I started studying film a little bit and like learning how to the making of, and it had been so long since I watched a horror movie, so I missed the Saw is my point for a long time. I actually remember I watched it in Dustin, I think with Dustin and Laura.
Really?
Yeah, so I was late into my college years when I actually got around to Saw.
Shout out to Dustin and Laura, great friends of the podcast. I don't even know if they listen, but hi,
No,
Dustin
probably
and Laura.
not, but I haven't talked to him in a long, long
You
time.
guys are great. So Josh, when did you first hear about Saw really quickly before we dive into it? When was kind of like, you're like, wow, there's a genre or a movie about this that kind of like when you think about it?
I definitely always had heard about Saw. It's one of those movies that kind of, it's one of those classic horror movies that sort of kicked off a subgenre of horror, right? Cade, good friend of the podcast, he recently watched Friday the 13th, and that was kind of what I said to him. I was like, the kickoff of the teen in the woods, like camp drama, like slasher, stuff like that. So this was also definitely a kickoff that obviously I'm very familiar with the story and what happens.
Did you
sort
know
of in them usually? But
Did you know the twist? In
I
this
did.
thing?
That is a bummer.
That sucks. Okay.
And it wasn't until like a second in, because obviously we're sitting there, the lights go on and all that happens, and then I looked and I was like, wait, I know. Are we spoilers? I know that guy's alive. I was like, I know that's him too. I was like, I've heard that. And so that would have been probably, like, I like the movie. That probably would have been a good twist, because I think it was kind of like I don't want to say one of the best twists ever, but it was definitely one that people recognize and they'll refer to when you're talking about big twists, especially in horror movies. So that definitely probably would have been a cool moment if I hadn't known that. I did, unfortunately. But still good nonetheless.
So sad you knew that going into it, because I think a lot of people, when we kind of get talking about movies, like especially a movie that's over 20 years old now, like that's what's crazy.
Hard not to know.
Is being like, well, it's not over 20 years. Sorry, it's just under 20 years old. 20 years is next year. It's 2004. But that's what's crazy, is you like probably found something along the way, or like even. Yeah, right? Okay, Vince.
I'm still over here thinking 20 years ago was like 1980s. No, 20 years ago I was in my teen years.
Yeah, same. I think about that and I'm like, oh man, awkward me during that era. And it's just weird to think that like this movie played such a pivotal role in so many parts of setting off a genre, but also I feel like it helped reemerge like a lot of things with like building a good story. I feel like when this came out was the start of the era when we first started really putting in CGI and putting in so many things into movies around that era.
I was gonna say there's no CGI in this movie.
No. But like for this movie though, it was still like an in-person building the set, the full thing that you really like, right? Practical effects type stuff.
And there's a big reason for that in this one. This movie had like no budget. At all. This movie was planned to be an at-home release. James Wan's like feature debut. They approached multiple companies asking them for money to produce it. Couldn't find anybody to do it, so eventually they said that someone told them to make a short, and so they made a short movie based on the bear trap that's in this movie, and took that around and eventually found someone to give them a budget. The budget was only
like $750,000, right?
Yeah, $1,200,000.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, super low to the point where I found a little thing that said all shots were in a single warehouse. There was no exterior shots in the whole thing. Everything shot in the warehouse. The production team couldn't afford it. The car chase was filmed in a garage in the warehouse by turning off the lights, adding some fog, and shaking the cars while filming in the front. Like they had nothing. And guess how much this movie made?
Like over $100 million, right?
Yeah, so planned to be an at-home release. Gathered some attention, took it to like Sundance and a bunch of these things, went worldwide, ended up making $103 million on a $1 million budget.
Meanwhile, Saw X is about to release, probably with a budget bigger than that, and it won't even make.
And probably won't make what it cost to make the first one. I don't know. Are these movies still big? I don't know.
I mean, there's still. That's the thing is, I looked at the other ones on Letterboxd, and they just kind of got progressively lower. Like there was a couple that went back and forth, but the first one had a solid rating. The second one was lower, but okay, good. And then they just kind of kept dropping as far as the scores went. But they're still making them, which means
they're probably
still making.
They almost had me come back for Spiral, which was not this next one.
The Chris Rock one.
Yeah, the Chris Rock one, because I wanted to see what he could do. They also felt like they were leaning more back into those like the kind of detective thriller genre instead of the torture porn genre, you know. So I was like, oh, maybe this will be good, but I did not hear anything good about it. So I
definitely didn't as well.
So I didn't.
Well, that's what's interesting is actually, so I decided to purchase this movie like just because I was like, oh, I have the physical copy somewhere, but like I put all my DVDs away in a box, and if they're in a box, I'm never gonna find them again. I just need to buy it, so I bought it, and it comes with. One of the packages was for the Spiral Saw type thing, the one that has Chris Rock in it. And I was like, oh. But then I read the reviews and like, just get the original one. It'll save you $4. I was like, done, getting it. So it's interesting to see how this is, because there was a time in my life I was really obsessed with horror films. Like, so probably maybe around the time you got out of it and need a break from them. I don't know what
No,
how that was.
like I said, I got out of it in my early years. Like I watched
like
L-
still
like-
under a teen.
no, like in my like 6 or 7, my dad brought home what's that freaking, I can't think of the name.
The
but-
Birds.
No, it's not a scary. It's a horror comedy, and I watched that, and it scared me so bad. And so I went from like I said, from like 6 till 18 years old without watching horror movies.
Wow.
Oh man. So during the time you were not watching horror movies, I really got into them. There was all these, like, we had an old movie store in my town. Like, it was a movie store you go in and rent DVDs still. Like, this was before Netflix got big, digitally streaming. And I used to spend like $10 to $15 a week renting movies. And it was funny. I just kept going, went through all the action adventure I wanted to, and made it to the horror section. And so I became super obsessed. I rented all the Saw movies that were available. And this is in like 2009. And I can't remember up to which one it was. But I just watched them like back to back over like a long period of time. And I was really obsessed with them and all the other horror films. And when the business went out of business, one, they thanked me for being such an avid patron of their business, because I had moved away and was
Single-handedly.
No,
I was gonna
literally.
say,
I'm
they probably would
pretty
have got out of
sure.
business way before.
I was in there spending like $15 a week, and like 2000,
awesome.
2007 to
That's
2000,
no small thing.
10. Yeah, it was like pretty funny. But the lady, I remember her telling me, she's like, "You are the sketchiest kid ever renting all these horror films." Because I just didn't care. Like, I was grabbing any of them. And it was weird because, right, a radar movie, you're not supposed to let like kids under a certain age rent them, right? Yeah, no, they never stopped me from renting these movies. And so
Shout
I
out the
watched,
cool people there.
Shout out to Action Video. Rest in peace. But it was just crazy because like I watched all these, and then this is the one movie that has stuck out to me the very most when someone's like, "What's a good horror movie like that I should watch?" And I was like, "Well, how gory can you go, or how sketchy can the story be?" And I'm like, "Saw. Just watch Saw."
Is this even a horror movie? Like, I was trying to decide while watching it last night, because it definitely gives you like, those kind of feelings. But
I feel
it's
like,
more of a detective story than it is like a
Yeah.
horror, right?
I feel like
I mean,
it crosses
it's kind
that.
of hard to. Yeah,
It crosses that line a few times where I feel like you could call it a horror movie because it gets to those parts. So we talked about what the later movies kind of end up becoming from just what I've videos I've watched and what you guys kind of
Did
mentioned.
you say you watched a Watch Mojo 10 worst kills or
yes,
something?
like
or?
the 10 like most brutal kills or
Yuck.
whatever.
Okay, sorry,
and
keep
so
going.
I've seen stuff like that, and obviously a lot of it kind of ends up leaning towards that side versus the detective thriller. So it does definitely kind of lean on the detective thriller side, and I liked that a lot. Like you said, it made it really interesting. There was a lot of cool little cuts between the different storylines and going back to the previous kills and people, and it was really interesting, but it definitely crossed that line of, hey, this is a very horror-esque, torture-esque thing a few times, where I feel like if you had to pick one, you could probably call it like a detective thriller or a horror, but you couldn't get away with telling people that it's not a horror is basically like,
I'd agree with that.
is my idea. But also we'll keep talking about Saw. I want to, but we're kind of all talking about how we got into
Yeah.
horror movies and stuff like that. I wanted to share how I kind of got into horror movies, because you guys know me. I'm a huge horror guy now. Starting like mid-August, I'd start watching spooky movies all the way through Halloween. I really got into horror when I was in college, when I was living in my parents' house, when this guy was actually my roommate. It was definitely Casey, who I had been kind of venturing more that way, because in high school and all this stuff, just the family that I lived in, horror was a no-go. Like, not at all, right? Like, even, hey, we're going over to my buddy's house to watch this, no-go. Like, the only times I watched like horror movies as a kid was when, hey, we're going out to this friend's house to just hang out, and then you're already there. And it's like, oh, we're watching House at the End of the Street, or we're watching this or that or whatever. So then when I got into college, I'd already kind of been looking, and I'd seen some horror movies, I think, in theaters and stuff like that. And Casey, we watched a lot of stuff together when he stayed there, and we I know there were so many nights, like The Ring, I saw the first time with Casey, just in that one little room downstairs at my parents' old house.
So funny because my wife, his sister, went on like an internship for 4 months, and I just moved in with Josh and kind of like hung out there because I'd work here and stuff, and we had like our 44-inch TV in Josh's like little room,
Just
and
in the bedroom,
my
right
bed is
there.
here.
Box TV or is it a flat screen?
No,
No, it was a flat screen.
It was,
Okay,
it was a big old flat screen TV. I wish it had been a box TV. That would have really brought in like we're watching sketchy horror films in the basement. But we did that. I remember, and I remember you're like, I haven't really watched this before, and like I was like, oh, it's great, and we just kept watching like a ton of different ones, right? Like you just kept bringing them home, and
You're
Well, yeah, that was
you're
the
his
thing.
horror Sherpa.
apparently,
Because we had like our schedules, because we would both be sitting there and we'd both be working on homework or work and everything at the same time. But it would usually be I would get home from work or something at a certain time, and you would be watching Mad Men or something else. Because I think I would watch some of it with you. We would watch a lot of How I Met Your Mother because it was my first time running through How I Met Your Mother. And like there was a time where I'm pretty sure like through a week or two, we watched a horror movie every single night. And it was
so good.
that was definitely fun times, and that was definitely a big introduction to a lot of these horror movies. But Casey, seeing that I was probably still quite a bit of an innocent mind at the time, he held back from the Saw recommendation at the time, or maybe he recommended it and I said no.
I think I prefaced some ideas to you of different films, and I would give you like enough context where you can make choices about them. You'd be like, anything like this, and I'd be like, well, I know about this and that and this, and then we would go with the lighter taste of it. But I think also I avoided recommending like a lot of like pretty brutal seeming
hard
films
ones.
because we're in your parents' home.
Exactly.
And I was like
we're
really
in our
nervous.
we're in this own room, but it's right at the bottom of the stairs. My mom walks by and hears
What are you watching?
Squelching, you know?
It's Sesame Street.
Yeah.
Winnie the Pooh. Like the horror Winnie the Pooh.
Blood and Honey.
There's
That's
gonna be a
getting
second one.
sequel that no one asked for.
Oh no. I forgot that we watched so much because I remember us just watching a lot of movies. We watched Darkness Falls together, the one about the Tooth Fairy, if I remember right, which is one of my all-time favorite fall movies. But like I remember that like very vividly. Now I'm like, oh man, I guess now Sorry I Corrupted You.
And now I love it. And now it's what I base my personality off of. Casey's spooky movies and spooky season.
Spooky.
At least for these months.
And then the rest is history. We've watched so many more scary films together over the years.
Like Saw.
Saw.
All
All
right. We
right.
can get
Okay,
back
so
to it.
I got some basic information for it. Directed by James Wan, like we said, feature debut. Written
Yes.
by James Wan and Lee, I think is how you say, isn't it? How do you pronounce Leigh?
Lee.
Or is it? Yeah,
Lay.
I think that's.
I think it's Lee though.
I just watched Haunting of Hill House, and Steve's wife name is Lee, spelled the same way.
Yeah.
Lee Winnell, I think is his full name. And Lee Winnell is actually the guy who also plays Adam in the movie.
Oh,
Yeah,
I didn't know
kinda-
that.
He popped up and I was just like, who is this like rip off Ezra Miller guy that
I
is
thought
in this
the
movie? I've
same
never seen
thing.
it, right?
Rip off Ezra
He
Miller.
reminds me
He
so
looks
much
like
of him.
Because I thought that same thing. I looked it up. I
And
was like,
Ezra
he
Miller
wouldn't have
was
been
like
this-
7 years old at this
Yeah,
time. So
for
how
real.
is he a rip off of his?
No, it's just a look.
Ezra Miller is a rip-off Lee. Okay.
Yeah, he was here first. But I was just thinking, like, who's this guy that shows up, has been in this one movie and I've never seen again? He wrote the movie and started it. I think he did a pretty good job in it, too.
Yeah.
Especially he did great in purposely overacting a death.
Oh my gosh.
I can just imagine the direction of that, just like overact the crap out of this. You're pretending to act or pretending to be dead. Yeah, anyway.
Get poisoned.
Starring Carrie Ellis as Dr. Gordon.
I was trying to
Who-
figure out how to say that guy's name, by the way. I was like, I don't know that
Pronounce
I've
it.
heard it. I just know him as like so many great characters.
And I had no clue that he was in this.
Okay.
Like, I knew a couple things about this movie and the general premise, but when one of the very first shots, because they have the shot later on, you figure out is the key or whatever going down the bathtub, and then it's Carrie Ellis, and I was like,
What are you doing?
I
here?
had no idea.
The first time I saw this too, I was just like, "This is the Princess Bride guy. Like, I'm supposed to take this guy serious? What is happening right now?
He's the mayor of Hawkins, Indiana. Vince. What do you mean?
Oh, he shows up there too.
Yeah. He shows up in so many things. Like he has like a very long fabled
Yeah,
career.
ever since I think Princess Bride is the only one that's like that I can think of that was like really family friendly. And then after that, I think everything else I've seen him in has been a little not hard, but like
But just not you're watching as a kid.
not like an 8-year-old's movie or whatever.
Yeah.
Not saying Princess Bride is only made for 8-year-olds, but you know what I'm saying, a family friendly.
For 9-year-olds too.
I just am not very familiar with his work apparently.
Yeah.
Tobin Bell plays Jigsaw,
Oh.
which almost like I was gonna ask you if this got spoiled by Amazon itself, because if you're watching it on Amazon Prime, if you ever hit pause, he's like popped up right there as Jigsaw, and I'm like, well, that gives away the movie.
Well, to be fair, I know what the guys who plays Jigsaw looks like because of the trailers for Saw X and stuff that are out right now. So I know what he looks like, but to be fair, this movie was long enough ago that the guy who played the guy who you think is the murderer for a while, right? I forget who that guy's name
Michael
is.
Emerson.
Yeah, the
Zepp.
one who the one who they try to get you to think that it's him, and then you realize that he was just pulled into the game as well.
Yep.
He looks fairly like the guy. Maybe not now that, like, I've already seen it. Maybe I'd look back and I'm like, oh, they look nothing similar. But just for someone who didn't know and who had seen him in the Saw X trailers and a few other things, I'm thinking, 20 years ago, I was like, oh, that could have been him. I'm like, but isn't he supposed to? So for a while there, I was like, what was happening? Like,
Okay, cool.
I was a little tripped up there, which is a good thing. Right?
Yeah.
So
Only two other actors that I wrote down that really stood out. I should have written down
Danny
the wife,
Glover.
but yeah, Danny Glover, which I miss. I miss Danny Glover in movies. I think he's actually coming out in something recently. I think I saw his name on something, but I can't remember what it was. But Danny Glover is just a treasure, man. Like I miss him.
He's biggest dude ever in my opinion. He's great.
And then Ken Leung.
Long?
Long?
Loong? I don't know.
I don't know how to pronounce his name either, but he's one of the kind of that guy actors where he shows up and I'm just like, yeah, that guy again. He's awesome. He's another actor that I'm just like, I haven't seen him since like, what? Was he in like a Batman movie or like a Christopher Nolan movie? Maybe it was,
I don't remember.
I can't remember.
I'd
But
have to look it up.
it's been a long time, but he plays Detective Singh. So that's it.
Poor guy.
And then Letterboxd gave it a 3.6 is the average.
The average, yep.
I gave it a 4.
What'd you give it?
I give it a 3, which is it's a little low on my scale, but to be fair, a lot of it had been spoiled, and I did kind of get turned. I didn't like the torture stuff, and I know that you guys said this stuff is a lot less than the other movies, and I understand that. Those things are just really brutal, which I get. That's like what this is about. And the concept at its base is really, really interesting, right? Like how far would you go to save your life or save someone else's life in the case of your family or anything like that? So the concept itself is really interesting. But when it gets like pretty brutal at times, and again, this isn't as bad as some of the other films, I like a lot of horror stuff and it can get kind of crazy. But that's some of the stuff that I'm just like, oh, I don't like this. Like, I don't enjoy. Yeah. And so for me, that was kind of a little bit of what brought it down. The detective thriller was definitely really, really good. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, having it spoiled it probably would have made the story maybe a little better for me if I had known that. And like, whoa, there the whole time. But then when it happened, I was like, yeah, I knew that and stuff. But 3 stars is still good. It's still a solid horror movie. And I'm definitely glad that I watched it. As one that I had put off because I didn't want to see any of these movies for years, I'm definitely glad that you guys recommended and I at least saw this because it was a solid watch, really good writing. I didn't know that it was James Wan's really big
Feature
first
debut.
one, exactly. So
what's crazy to think about? Sorry, really quickly.
Oh,
like,
I'm done.
I the rating thing, I didn't rate it on Letterboxd, guys. I'm sorry. But what's crazy to me is like James Wan. What a career, and starting from this movie, right? And that was something I wanted to highlight was like, think about like, holy crap, like you built from this. And so it's cool to kind of see that part.
I could definitely feel his vibes in this too. Like,
I could.
Remember, what was that movie I made you guys watch last spooky season with the head, the face in the back of the head?
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you ever got around to it.
I
but
didn't watch it because my wife
Malignant.
Yeah.
Malignant.
Like I definitely got like pre-Malignant vibes from this. Just in the way that he films the cuts, the movements, that kind of stuff, the like high intensity moments. It's just like, oh, I can feel like original James Wan in that movie.
Yeah.
I love when a director has a style that comes through the cinematography, the direction, anything like that, that you can feel something like that. Where we're watching Saw way back when, and we're like, oh, like he did similar stuff in Malignant, or I saw this in Conjuring, different stuff like that. Where, yeah, I always love to see that bleed through, because it shows that a director isn't just someone there to make sure that the film gets made a certain way. They put their own thumbprint.
A little flavor
They
to
put
it.
their own style to what they're doing, and you can tell what's happening.
Well, I think that goes to so much of what we've talked about over the years of doing this podcast. Is we've talked so much about Nolan. We've talked a lot about, oh gosh, I'm going to blank, like M. Night Shyamalan and all those people.
I don't know if we've talked about Wes Anderson, but Wes Anderson is definitely a big one.
I love Wes Anderson. Those are
has
actually more
style,
my
obviously.
films that I love. But also like David Fincher and like so many different directors, they have a theme with them, and like A24, Ari Aster, and all these people, right? Like they just have their style. And James Wan, I think, like when I think about a James Wan film, and this is crazy, we've watched a lot of them. He's been the producer on a lot of films, and he even gets his little bit of spice on those ones that he just is kind of like barely touching. But you're like, you have a vibe. Like this is your thing. And I thought that like knowing as much as I do and having watched as much and having watched this before, rewatching it, like I was led by like what you're talking about, the films, like the principal photography of the film, and then the sounds of the film as we're going through these eerie scenes that you didn't really like. And I'm not blaming you for disliking them. It's really, I thought they built the story because I knew it already. And I was like, oh man, like looking at this through my, current eyes, I'm like, I see why this builds it, but also it's like so gross, but it was so good.
Your
I think
perfectly
the reason
spectacled eyes.
Yeah, I think this one's perfect for me because it alludes to these like horrible deaths that you talk about, but it never actually shows the horrible deaths. I don't want to watch those deaths, but like the idea of this guy, like you said, not tricking, but he's got this brain tumor.
Tricking.
Yeah, he's tricking, I guess, but that's not my point. Is he's got this brain tumor. He wants to teach people to appreciate life, so he's going around and he's telling these people, you want to die? Well, then you're going to die, and you're going to die in a horrific way if that's what you want to do. Like the razor blade guy, he slit his wrist trying to kill himself, so he puts him in a cage with razor blades. But you don't have to actually see. I guess there are a couple of like split scenes of the guy.
I was going to say
crawling
that
through
one,
the
they like
razor
talk, each of the crimes they kind of talk through, like why you're in this cage, what kind of things you're doing, why you should be more grateful of the life that you have or the opportunities afforded you. But like with the razor wire guy, like really interesting, they show him kind of like waking up and kind of panicking, but they don't show the final like hit of it. And the same with,
and they also describe it like it cuts so deep that like stomach acid came out, and that puts this idea in your mind. I don't know. Is that worse than seeing it actually like in special effects happen? I don't know. I can't decide.
That's a good question, because I'm definitely imagining, and like you mentioned, the sounds, right? They definitely do a good job with those fake sounds, because when Bear Trap Face Lady is looking, if we got,
Oh, it's just Tim. Finish
Okay.
thought.
so like when Bear Trap Lady is stabbing the guy to get the key out of his stomach or whatever like that, and you've got the squelching and all that stuff, I was like, oh, I don't know. Like you're not seeing anything, but I was there imagining exactly what was happening.
the way that it's shot so well, so you don't have to see it. But I think what's cool is you talk about this from the timeline of the movies kind of coming in, and like, right, the people who are probably of legal age to watch this when it came out, right, like the actual R rating, those are people who'd grown up through more emerging technologies where they probably read more books, they probably saw and understood the visuals and imagining different things. But even like me, right, when I saw this the first time, I was like picturing like in my mind like a certain part of this that was like, it's pretty sketchy, gross. And this is the thing that nightmares are for me, is like the unknown of it, like not knowing, like, like if there's something happens, you're like, oh, I just want to know. But I knew the ending of it, but what happened in the middle, and I'm like, do I want to know because I'm morbid, dark, or what? Or is it just like I want to know because I want to feel resolved when I go to bed and I don't want to have nightmares about it type thing.
That's my question for you in these movies. What comes first, the idea for the kill or the purpose for the kill? Like when they're making a Saw movie, do you think that they're going in and being like, what are the most gruesome, crazy ways we can kill someone, and then making a movie around it? I don't think that was the case in this original, but I haven't seen the sequels. So you'll have to tell me. Like I have no idea what goes on
sounds
next.
Like
but
the chicken or the egg question, right?
It just looks like the trailers are just 100% like gore, 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 and not so much like story focused anymore.
Well, it's shock value, right? It's like, what can we do to get people in the seats? Because like, I would imagine like there is like some basis around like, right, like historical writings of sketchy things and kind of pulling things in, and also like behaviors of serial killers, right? But like the idea, I think, with coming up with these ideas is like, what are the things that fuel people's nightmares? Did they go? Where did they?
I used
do
to
their
sit around
research?
and like when me and my friends would talk about this franchise back in the day, like having no familiarity with it. We used to sit around and be like, who are these people that are laying in bed just imagining how to kill each other? Like, what is wrong with people?
These are the people who are on strike right now in Hollywood.
Thinking about those people on the other side of the line.
Yeah, no, I don't know. What do you think, Josh?
Here's the thing. Saw is a really weird franchise in the following aspect. So a lot of horror gets its emotionality, its feel, its spookiness, that eeriness that it gives you from the unknown, right? There's so much of that, and a lot of different movies talk about it. It's like what's scary, what's in the dark is what's scary because you can't actually see it. You don't know what's there. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of times where horror movies will keep that, and then a lot of times they'll keep it through to the end where you really only partially see these big kind of scary things, because when you actually see something in the light or anything like that, it doesn't end up being as scary, or someone's like, that looks dumb and all this stuff like that. So Saw, obviously this first one, it kind of ends up like that because it's a lot more imagined of, hey, this is what she's doing, blah, blah, blah. It's gross. And then in the following ones, in the sequels, it gets very graphic.
Well, it becomes torture gore.
Exactly.
Delight.
And it's the opposite end where a lot of times you see that scary thing and you're like, oh, it's not that bad. In Saw, that's not the case, right? These things that they end up showing for those shock values, like you said, are pretty extreme, pretty insane. And so it's kind of the opposite of that dark horror where it's seeing as much as you can is actually worse for you, basically.
Well, I was kind of wondering, did James Wan like direct the following movie, like number 2? He did not. And I'm curious, like, so here's my question, I guess, with it is like, okay, so like the next one is different people. Like, so James Wan and his buddy, right, who's Adam, they created the original idea. And then you turn your idea over to other people and say, I trust you to build this universe, this franchise, if they come and pitch you the idea, right? But you don't always know what the heck is in that person's mind or those writers' mind in that group. And like, I would imagine like the shock value, the depth, the gore, the whatever it is, like the visuals of it. Like, I'm curious, like, honestly, like I would love to see, like, look back at the data. You're a data guy, so you love this kind of stuff too, probably. But like, butts in seats, how many people were there? Like, what was the like walkout rate of people? Like, because it got too gory. Like, that's what I'm curious about. Is because I'm like, some of these got really bad and uncomfortable. When I remember watching these in my basement by myself, hiding under blankets as like a teenager, being like, "Ooh, that's too much."
The only thing that I can appreciate from the gore, like I hate seeing it, but I can really appreciate the art behind it, making it happen.
Yeah.
Like to do that practically, like you go back and watch some of these old 80s movies and watch some of the like crazy stuff that they do with animatronics, or how creative they get with like squibs and stuff, you know, before they had that, especially on a low budget. That's super cool.
Guys,
And
I just
love
found that
kind of
there's a
stuff.
theme park based off of Saw.
Well, that's what I was going to. Well, not the theme park. You have to tell me about that. But my first thought when this movie starts, and it just immediately, by the way, I love the way it starts, which just drops you in so you're as confused as the characters.
Yeah.
I immediately thought, oh, this is the original escape room. How have we not been doing this
thought of
since
that too.
2004?
Yeah.
Like, what took people so long to like get going on
This
this?
is the perfect idea. We had it all this time.
Escape.
Where's
Yeah.
the...
Oh, so they like have some attractions like built off it. Like Saw the ride in Euro theme park, like in Thorpe Park. So many Saw Game Over horror maze made by Universal Studios. Saw a themed haunted house during a month at the Fight Dome in Circus Las Vegas. So like people want to go not only to see these movies,
Oh, yeah.
but they want to go. There's also
lots of
something called Saw Mania, where event goers can meet actors, directors. I'm curious now. I want to look up how many people have died over the Saw franchise.
Only
Like,
6 in this movie. That was in the trivia in IMDb. 6 kill count.
so 6 in this movie, but like the
Not
ones,
very many in this
the
one.
ones going forward are pretty sketch. But like that's what's so fascinating is like the idea, like, I think they talk about it actually in this movie, and correct me if I'm wrong, where they're like, well, he's a serial killer, but he's actually not doing the killing, is kind of what the doctor guy says, is he's like, well, he's not the one doing the killing. They find ways for them to kill themselves. And
that's what he's doing. He's trying to teach him that lesson.
yeah,
right?
and
not do it. Not.
But he's not really a serial killer then if he's not taking the lives. It's like in the way, like you're taking the action on yourself is what's weird. But he is setting everything up. That's kind of where the whatever it is, right? Like that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, what really is he? Like, is he a madman? Is he a brilliant mind? What is he?
Is he a savior? I mean, look at Bear Trap Girl. She got out of there and she's just like, he saved my life. He
She's
gave me
clean.
an appreciation for life again. Now cleaned up and appreciating it. No, this guy's a horrible person. He should go to prison for life.
Casey.
He's not doing anything good.
What?
This is not how you teach people to appreciate life. I'm sorry.
What? But
I'll bet you if you talk to all the other guys who didn't survive, they'd be singing a different tune than her.
obviously they're not speaking these days.
So obviously Saw is one of the biggest horror franchises that has ever existed as far as number of movies and just characters. And if we talk about characters and things that are iconic about it, that mask, right?
Yeah, the iconic doll mask.
Which made by James Wan and the guy who plays Dave too. They actually handmade that because there's no budget for this movie.
That's the thing is, I'm pretty sure later on he kind of wears it, right? Like, or at least it ends up being more
in a series.
Life size. I'm pretty sure. I've seen like things where like it actually ends up like the doll ends up riding in on the tricycle or whatever, but it looks life sized, and so I'd think that either he or someone.
That puppet's name is Billy the Puppet, by the way. I knew it had an official name.
Yes,
sorry.
I knew that too. So Billy the Puppet. And that's the whole thing. It's one of the most iconic things of all time, obviously. So I used to play a lot of Call of Duty, and back when they released one of the very first big Halloween updates for Warzone, they released a few like skins that you could have that were based on like some big horror movies and stuff, and it was Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then Billy
in Call of Duty, huh?
In Call of Duty, and I have the Billy the Puppet one, or I had it. They just shut down those servers not too long ago, but I had that one because it was sick. Like running around Verdansk, get dark with the Billy the Puppet one, and it had voice lines and stuff. It was very cool.
So Billy the Puppet, right here's the paper towel rolls were used internally to make it move, and the puppeteers pulled along a fishing line. But he was made with clay, paper mache, and black ping pong balls with the irises painted in for the eyes.
Dude, and that's the thing. It's so simple, so low budget, and that ended up being one of the most iconic masks things in horror movies of all time. Mm-hmm. And that's what goes to show you don't need these big, crazy things to make a good, solid horror movie or to make something like that. Because we've talked about it. There are so many things that come out where even if it's shrouded in darkness, and then all of a sudden it comes to the light and you're just like, boo, that looks stupid. Like, I don't like it. And to be fair, like we can be kind of spoiled now because of what we've had in the past with these really cool things. You think about, Jason and the Jason mask, and you think about, or like with the hockey mask and everything, you think about Billy the Puppet, you think about the Michael Myers mask, everything like that. And so it's really hard to create something that feels really new and fresh and original, which is why it was really cool to have it in this one. Really cool to actually watch the movie that it originated from.
Yeah. My only nitpick, and it's nothing they could have done, is it's 20 years old and it kind of feels a tiny bit dated. But I also love that because it feels like a timepiece in its own. But little things where I'm just like, when I was watching it, I was thinking like, man, why did they film this in such a low frame rate? Because they kept doing like slow motion, and the slow motion in this is choppy.
Yeah.
And so I was like thinking that kind of stuff, like why did they do this? And I'm thinking like maybe it was a budgetary thing, like maybe they just didn't have the technology that they required for the movie because they weren't provided it. I don't know, but that really stood out to me was the choppiness of the slow mo, which is fine. It's a 20-year-old movie.
Like, what are you gonna do?
20-year-old movie with
a $1 billion budget.
This film was advertised as coming soon to theaters. Like how it's going. So the choppy rate, like,
and it probably looked fine on the box TVs that we had back then. We wouldn't even notice. Like
we didn't
on these
notice
high defs. It makes it easy. Also, I'm not a big fan of the jump cuts. There's so many jump cuts in this of just like every angle really fast to provide like intensity and you know, like I'm not a big fan of that anymore. I actually wrote down somewhere here that talked about the reasoning behind those jump cuts, but I don't remember what it is. Basically, James Wan had like an explanation of just like wanting to represent what was going through the mind of the character in those moments. And so like that chaotic moment where she's like trying to get the bear trap off her head, like the chaos of it all in her mind is being represented by all these jump cuts. So he's like got reasons behind it, but I feel like excessive jump cuts was a very mid 2000s trend that I'm really glad that we've gotten away from, you know.
Fast.
Well, it's coming back, right? It's a 20-year trend. So 20
I
years
hope
of this
not.
movie are coming back.
But other than that, like I have like no nitpicks about this movie. For the budget they did it on, in the locations that they did it on, I did think to myself at one point, like, I don't know what city this is or world this is, but every room looks just like garbage, like drippy walls and like raining all the time and just dirty. And I'm like, everywhere they go, even the doctor's office, like felt that Dr. Gordon worked in felt kind of grungy and gross. I was just like,
I think
this world would not be a fun world to live in.
yeah, I feel like just kind of some of those details you're talking about, I don't know if it was intentional, but it seems to like maybe match, because like in all truthfulness, the narrative is Jigsaw's, right? Like, this is my story, this is what I'm going through. But I think they had to like show the effects of society's decay in this part. Like
it definitely gives the whole movie like a very specific vibe of just grunge and
dirty.
gross.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point, is like obviously, right, I want to teach you a lesson, right? Like blah blah blah.
You want to play a game?
Which is another one of those iconic things that came out of it. I think that for me is more iconic than the puppet itself. Is just that line, "You ought to play a game."
Let's play a little game. Your whole life you've been blah 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 blah. Yeah, no. I don't know though. Like, it's such a fascinating thing. I don't really have a lot of nitpicks about this. Like, I'm the guy who usually just like, I enjoyed the movie, it was fun. But I don't know. It's kind of weird. I think I'm the one in here who's always like, I don't want any more sequels. And I've watched more movies of this than I can say, but I really wish that we had stopped, to be honest with you. I think it was a great standalone film as it was, even though he gets up at the end of the movie, right? 20-year-old movie, I can say this, and just slams the door at the end, and that's the movie, right?
That's a solid end.
That
dude.
is.
That's all you
that
need to
was
know.
the end for me. Like, that
Yeah.
literally is the end for me. I haven't explored
seen the
any
other
other
ones.
I
ones.
wish
don't
I
ever
was in your
plan
shoes,
to.
Vince, right now. I wish that like I hadn't seen the rest, because like it just got weirder, darker, gorier, twistier, meat factoryer. I just don't want to.
Don't say that.
No, it's what it is.
Speaking of going to Tacos,
Yeah, we're
tonight.
going to the meat factory soon. But like, that's the end for me. And I don't want to take too much time up, but like, that's kind of thoughts. Josh, what are your closing thoughts, nitpicks, kind of like personal likes, dislikes, hates?
My closing thoughts is I'm definitely glad that I could see this and watch it, and that you guys convinced me to. Like, I'm not upset that I ended up watching it at all. My buddy said, I don't know, you might watch this and have an itching to watch the other ones. I do not. Great. That is what I'll say moving forward. And I gave it 3 stars on Letterboxd. I think it can be kind of hard to live up to something almost 20 years later, that it's been set as one of the great like horror movies of all time, or sort of started off one of the greatest horror movies and not trilogies, but sets of multiple movies. What is it? Like
Universes,
a
series.
Yeah, exactly. Like it started off something incredible, which so many people know and so many people love. A lot of people love so many in all of these movies. It's their thing, right? And so it's kind of hard to live up to that so many years later, having it be on this pedestal and going back to watch something that I didn't know all about, the budget constraints and everything like that, when I was going into it watching it as well, which makes it even more incredible. It was still a solid film. Excellent writing, really good, thought-provoking stuff, which is what I always like. And so definitely saw a watch. I'm glad that you guys had me watch it.
Yeah. My final thought on this and recommendation: don't watch any other Saw movies besides the first one, to be super honest with me. Me to you, right? If you haven't watched any of the Saw movies, because it's been around for so long, there's so many pop culture and iconic things that have come from this. You probably are going to get spoilers like Josh did for his first time going through. But it is a time capsule, and I want to highlight that because some of the tech in there like reminded me of being this age or younger, right? Like some of the old tech, all the devices, all that kind of stuff was like, wow, this is like my childhood in some ways, like rewatching it, right, as an adult. But I also think that like if you look at this film for what it is a beautiful first-time directorial film. Low budget shot, but it still is a weird, relevant dialogue. And going back to the movie we talked about last time, escape rooms, right? Kind of like the thing. For this one, escape rooms, like, I think this was a dive into kind of that thing, like a real big, unique dive into something, because at the time, like, different things were becoming popular. This was before, like, the, what do you call it, when society collapses from the economic downturn that happened a few years later. But it was kind of interesting to, like, look at that and be like, wow, wild. So, like the rental, you know, talking about Airbnbs and kind of the horror film built around that. This, for me, was like a good, dingy, weird, medical fueled rage. I don't know what you want to call it. And I know we didn't go too deep into this movie. It's 20 years old. You can watch it yourself. It's on Amazon Prime and other places. Amazon, pay us. But it's mostly just like I don't know, it was fun to watch. And I think it was a good tone for me for a spooky season.
Yeah.
Yep. Vince, do you have any final thoughts?
I really like this movie. I don't need to franchise it either. I don't need to go out to the other ones. I think it's one of those movies that if you are into those scary movies, it's a must see. Like,
yeah.
It's one of the OGs. It spawned, like you said, an amazing, a huge franchise. Like, it's an original. And if you're a horror movie fan, you have to see the originals, right? Which I need to get around to still. Like, I don't think I've seen all the OGs yet, but this is one of them that you have to see.
So if you ever want to go back, sorry, I'm not trying to interject on the OGs and stuff. If you ever want to go back and watch some of the classics, right, like Hitchcock and all that kind of stuff, you should
go way back.
Yeah, I'm talking like go back in the day. Look at the fun stuff too. There's like fun thrillers and all that kind of stuff that exists too. So do it. But are we done? Can I show you guys something kind of fun?
No, I'm good.
I want this to be at the end. So thank you for joining us at the Pause Rewind Play podcast. Vince, Josh, thanks for watching Saw with me. I love it a lot. I'm not trying to interject and end this really quickly.
It was the most fun I've had without lubricant.
And in that tune as well, you can get an adult Billy the Puppet costume for your significant other. There's a sexy version and a less sexy version. And with that, we leave you with our pop culture icon and pop culture moment on Saw, the 20-year-old movie that started a subgenre of gorific intent.
Go ahead and buy your wife that costume now?
No, not a chance. No. Ugh. Right. What's the laughing? Like that. Catch you next time on the Pause Rewind Play podcast.